Most people don't wake up one day and decide to challenge the story they've been told their entire lives. It usually starts quieter than that. A question that won't go away, a detail that doesn't fit, a moment where faith, history, and authority collide. Some people ignore that moment, others lean into it, no matter the cost. Tonight's guest is someone who followed that question all the way to the end, and then had the courage to write it down. This isn't about outrage, this isn't about fear. This is about how a life, a worldview, and a belief system are shaped when the truth refuses to stay buried. History didn't disappear. It was rewritten. This is the broken truth. Welcome back to the Broken Truth Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett. Today we have a very special guest. Author of the book, DC Swamp Strikes Back, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and Their Similar Battles. Dennis Brennan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Garrett. I really appreciate being here.
No, of course. You sent me an email a few weeks back, and at first, I had no clue who you were, to be quite honest. Looks like this book was published relatively recently, and as soon as I searched it, I was like, what is this? Well, I had the chance over the past week and a half to complete your book, and it really shocked me. I have never been able to draw the parallels from the founding fathers up until our modern administration. And for lack of a better word, they're quite shocking. So let's kind of walk through your life and what got you into doing this as a whole. So where'd you grow up? What was your family like? And how did those early years shape the way you see the world?
Yeah, I'm the second of five in a household, grew up in a small, very small suburb in Illinois called Marionette Park, 2,300 people. I'm the second son. My parents are both Irish immigrants. They met here after emigrating to the country. So Irish Catholic, church on Sunday, Catholic high schools, went to a Catholic university. Those things certainly shaped my life. My father was involved as a precinct worker, actually, for the Democrat Party in Cook County, had a job with the county. So I was out walking precincts with him when I was young. And I really developed a love for politics, although my love for the Democrats went away as I aged. Perhaps as I had to pay taxes.
Okay.
So I became the first Republican in the House, just based on what I was seeing. And that would go back to like the Ronald Reagan era. But since then, I've been, a hard R, as they would say. So went to a small university, St. Xavier University. Again, there was only probably 2,500 people there when I went. I studied journalism. And when I was getting out of school, there were two job offers. One was for like $13,000, I believe, in Arkansas at a radio station. And I think the other one was in Iowa for $9,000 at a newspaper, I believe. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm working part-time at a food store, stocking groceries, and I'm making $14,000. Now, I'm going to stay doing this and maybe go to law school. So I went off to law school. My older brother was already there ahead of me. Did that for 3 years. But at the same time, I was also interested in journalism as I had studied it. So I started working for a small newspaper also at the same time. And I developed my own newspaper, mostly for politics, to get the story out. I found the media was, even dishonest back then. And I found that the only way to get it out was to write it yourself. So I did do that over the course of the, several years. I had different publications, even did one, an online publication not that long ago, probably in the last 15 years. So, as I practiced law, I still was involved in politics, ran for and won a couple school board positions, was a township collector, was a village trustee, never really got past that. So, which maybe I should have just avoided all that. There was a lot of wasted time because what I really always enjoyed was writing. So I had the chance, a friend of mine wrote a book about Aaron Burr, and he asked me to read it. I did, and he came to my office and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, he's a good writer, so I knew that would be good." But I said, "I think you missed the real story here." Because when I read his book, I realized everything that was happening to Aaron Burr, which a lot of it I didn't know, is the same things that I thought was happening at that time to Trump as he was seeking his election in 2024. And over the course of the 4 years ahead of that time, and I said, "That's what the story is." And he looked at me like I had three eyes or something. He's a
as it's always done.
He's a Democratic political consultant, so he often looks at me that way. And I said, "No, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to write that book because that's the story." And I started writing in it and kind of flowed. I did some more research on Burr. Trump was kind of easy because he's right there. So it was easy to get a lot of stuff on Trump. But I thought there was a parallel there. I ran it by, a friend of mine, what he thought. He's like, "Yes, I think the same thing." He had read the book. And so, yeah, we went and I got it done. And so far, I think most of the response, I've had a few people. There was one podcast I was on, and I think it's kind of funny. She obviously hadn't read the book because halfway through the podcast, she said, "Newsflash, I just realized you're a Trump supporter." I'm like, yes.
Wow.
I said, but I didn't start writing the book that way. I wrote it, trying to be unbiased as much as you can. Writing, it's almost impossible. You are going in with the theory. If it didn't work out when I did the research, I wouldn't have wrote the book. I would have stopped. I wasn't going to write a book saying Burr was attacked and Trump is a clown. I don't think that would have been a great book. So, she was kind of surprised. And the real surprise, it tells you the problems that we have in society. She said to me, "But you're so nice." Like, there are Trump supporters that are nice. There are people that don't like Trump that are nice, other than, maybe to him. So
people with beliefs on every side, regardless of race, color, religion, or bias. It doesn't matter. What I found most interesting about your book is there are slight, I'd say ever so slight, references that support that you're right wing. But for the most part, I'd say your book is unbiased. And that's on what I found very refreshing. It's not like rah Trump necessarily. It's like a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's just the right amount to where really any audience can read it. And it's not overwhelming, which was very refreshing. But you're absolutely right in terms of the parallels to our modern history. I honestly refer to a lot of history as like one-liners. And overall, we're missing the context of what actually happened. And when you go back to Aaron Burr, that's something that was kind of swept under the rug. And just like you, stuff that I never even knew. And your book brought this to light for me. And as I went to go research it further, I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is absolutely mind-boggling.
Isn't it, though? It's really fascinating because, as I said in the book, what we remember is Burr shot Hamilton and Hamilton died. And, you had the musical Hamilton that kind of reinforces that Burr is the bad guy. But that's kind of what we were taught in grammar school. That's all we were taught. I don't remember if they did teach about the Burr conspiracy. It just flew by me as I didn't care or something. And that's possible. I might not have been paying attention, or I missed that day. Like in school, you miss one day, you could miss a whole story. It's important to go to school every day because we might have done that and I wasn't there. And but I've talked to other people who say I didn't know this stuff either.
Absolutely. And what I find most interesting about our education system is, for me, history was something I was never, ever interested in, at least from the lecture perspective, because it was so dry. For me, it was always this older gentleman who was just either very angry or just very boring. And I could never get behind that. I liked interactive classes where we can actually question things and do that kind of stuff. So overall, I never really got into history up until I actually graduated. And then once I did graduate and started reading philosophy and started reading different historical narratives, I was like, wow, this is actually something I've always been interested in, but just not from that dry lecture perspective. And I think our education system does us a disservice in that manner, because if they did make it more enjoyable, then people would question things more. And I don't think that the system or the powers that be want that to happen, because if the truth were to come out, then it's quite damning for them.
No, I think you're right. And one of the things that always struck me with history, it's with the advent of cable TV and now streaming, you see a lot of documentaries that are historical in nature, and they're very interesting when you watch them. Now, I don't know if I was reading them that I'd be that interested, and some of that I might have read before, and it's just the way they put it on. I've often thought with education, some people probably learn better by seeing videos, and not that they should sit in their room and just watch movies, but
Yeah.
That's probably not, I don't know if that's the best education system, but for learning, it might be ingrained in our heads better if we actually see it acted out in a way that you're like, oh, I kind of get it now.
No, I could absolutely relate to that. And honestly, I am that generation that consumes YouTube videos, and then I feel like I'm a master at it just like that. When it comes to making something, when it comes to being able to learn something, whether it be household work, business work, whatever it may be, you can just watch something, and with the blink of an eye, they're in a little trial and error, of course, because we're not masters, but you get it done at the end of the day. What role did faith or religion play in your upbringing, and how has that relationship evolved over the course of your life?
Wow. Faith and religion have been important. Like I said, we were Irish Catholic family. We went to church, every Sunday. We might have been the only family on the block that always went. And if you had, my brother and I are only a year apart, so we'd have baseball games, Little League, that they played on Sunday for some reason. You still went to church. You might have gone in your uniform, or you had to go the night before, or an early mass, but you were going. My father and mother weren't going to let that go. And, when it came, I went to a public grade school because it was right down the street, for elementary and junior high. But for high school, my mom insisted, and I think my dad did too, that we had to go to a Catholic high school. It was a better school than the public school. You won't amount to anything. And that became important. But, when you're in a Catholic high school, there's a lot of rules. You have to follow them, and you're being taught by, religious brothers, or some of them are priests. But for me, it was religious brothers. It does ingrain a certain way of thinking, and certain issues like abortion, for instance, that was being discussed way back then. And for college, I didn't look to go to a Catholic university, but I did go there, and it wasn't, it was more that they had something I wanted to study, so I went there. But there were actually some nuns, if you can believe that, still then. And there were a couple that taught me, and they actually were good, hard, but they were good teachers.
Was the ruler still a thing at that point? Or had that been kind of washed out?
At that point, yes.
Wow.
No,
wow.
It was still there. And I can tell you, it's more of setting, a way. It's not only a way of thinking, but it's, an ethical way of thinking and doing the right thing. And in high school, they forced us, which probably they wouldn't want to hear this, but they forced us to give to the missions. So you have that in your head that you're supposed to give to poor people, even though my family was not, well off. They were struggling to send me to a Catholic high school. So you're basically taking lunch money rather than having someone bigger beat you up. The school was beating you up every so often for the missions. But I do think it makes you aware that there are problems all over the world, and all this money would go to South America or Africa or wherever. Sometimes I didn't really care. All I knew was the money was leaving me, and that was not good. It does. It's something though. When I got married and had my own son, we went to church too every week and made sure that we stayed part of the community. So I think it's important because without that, I wouldn't say it's chaos, but I think you need the guardrails. It's almost like when you can't bowl and they put up when you're a kid and they put those guardrails up. So you're the bumpers or whatever they call them. It gives you that kind of guardrail so you don't go off too far to the end. You know that there's some supreme being, and you hope to live your life.
It gives you a moral foundation, a structure to life. And I can actually relate to that directly. I went to private school my whole life, and also being a religious school, their mission statement was actually everyone prepared, everyone saved. So it was very interesting growing up. And I think that this is where I started to witness corruption as per se. So brief story to give some context to this. My senior year of high school, played football. There was a homecoming party and a couple of schools involved, but a video went out on social media of one of our dancers who was intoxicated, throwing up everywhere. Well, of course, to a religious-based school, this is a no-no. If you were drinking, smoking, anything, like big no-no, you're going to get some sort of punishment. So we made it to the playoffs that season, and the school wanted to restrict everyone who went to that party and not allow them to play on the playoff game. Well, some of the families of the football team members were major donors to the school. And one of them came into the school and said, if you do not let them pay, you will not get another dollar from me. And lo and behold, that Friday night, we all played.
That becomes a problem. You have to stick to it at some point, but finances, you kind of learn a different lesson. Like people that have money can make demands, and may as well learn it in high school, because even the best intentioned people, like the school leaders, they could be forced into things based on money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very, very interesting. And that's kind of what brought light to a lot of that issue that I was kind of referring to. And then kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I've never stopped since, but it's been quite the journey. Was there a moment or a series of moments where you realized the world wasn't quite what you've been told, and what triggered that shift?
Wow. I think, as you go through life, you realize that sometimes there's things you're told that just aren't true, right? As a kid, you learn, right? You learn, wait a minute, there's no Santa Claus? Who's been leaving these gifts here? That's probably the first time you realize, wow, my parents told me this story, and everybody else's parents told them this. And you start, from there, you're probably not as surprised when things turn out to be false, that you find out, oh, that's not exactly what happened. Which always makes me wonder when you talk about politics, people are so sure, for instance, that there's no fraud in elections, even though if you find it, they'll say, well, that wouldn't have made a difference in the election. Well, how do you know there's not more? It's always, that wouldn't make a difference. We just had in Georgia where, they found, I think it was 315,000 ballots that weren't properly initialed and shouldn't have been counted. Well, in that case, and I believe, Trump was only getting a small percentage of those votes in Fulton County. So he would have won that election back in 2020. And probably 2 senators would have been different. And it's funny because they'll tell you this doesn't happen, and then you find something and you're like, oh, well, maybe it did happen. So there's there's little things like Santa Claus, although that's huge to someone who's whatever age you learn that. It becomes it seems like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Or, you find out something like elections that, is the basis of our whole country. They might have actually stolen an election. You're like, how can that be? They tell me it's impossible. So I think over the course of time, and then you lose faith just generally, where you might not be told things. But, I worked for the state of Illinois as attorney, when I first got out of law school, and we had an intern who was in law school, and he was very liberal, and already I was conservative. And he was saying, tell me all these liberal talking points. Well, he got his first paycheck and he came over to me, and I was in a cubicle actually. And he says, what is this? I don't, what? And I'm like, well, that's taxes, my friend. They withhold taxes from you too, not just me and everybody else here. I said, you'll be a conservative in no time once you see this. And he was very upset. I don't know if he ever became a conservative. I know he went to work for a bank, so probably, but I don't know for sure.
It's very funny how some people don't understand concepts that are so simple at the end of the day. But yet, regardless of how many times you beat it over the back of their head on this is not necessarily appropriate ways of thought, you can feed them the pudding, show them the facts, show them the evidence, but they're still not going to believe it, which is interesting. People are very stuck in their ways, to say the least.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes that, like, for instance, that intern getting his pay stub and realizing, they take taxes out. I think he had a new respect at that point for why I had to change to be a Republican. It was like, not that they don't take taxes. Everybody takes taxes from you. It's been going on, from, the Roman Empire on here. I mean, they're always going to take taxes, but don't be so foolish to think that people want to pay them all the time. I mean, he just couldn't understand, like, why are you so anti-tax increases? Well, pay them.
So were your parents both left-leaning?
At that time, the Democrat Party wasn't that left. My dad was more, union worker, but it was more middle of the road. I think they were more involved with the Democrats because, as he said, they're for the working party. That's how he looked at it, which at that time, I would say they were. I think that's kind of shifted now with Trump. And I don't know what the Democrats are for. It's not the workers. So, but yeah, and I think, so they were just kind of not born into it, but it became, we're in this class level. This is who we vote for. Poorer people vote for the Democrats. And
it's become quite concerning, honestly. And as we got into the 21st century and technology developed and social media and the internet further advanced, and now we have the presentation of AI in many facets, it has really distracted us. It has completely rewired our brain chemistry. And it has honestly put us on these like micro pedestals, and our communities and our things that we support and our worldview is now shaped by these algorithms. And I actually did a little experiment with my mother because we don't see eye to eye on many things. So I was like, here, look, do me a favor, grab your phone. I'm going to grab my phone. We're going to search the exact same topic, the exact same phrasing and everything. And it's going to give us two different answers. And this is important to realize because the facts are perspective based in terms of the algorithm. It's going to feed you whatever you want to know based on your perspective and what it knows about you. And lo and behold, it did exactly that. And my mother, who is much older, in her late 60s, didn't realize this, but we're almost blinded by this in my generation because we'll continue to scroll through the feeds. It feeds us whatever narrative it wants us to know, and we really don't know what the facts are anymore.
Right. Well, you find yourself too, or at least I do, depending on where you got your news, you might have to actually research it. which is sad. And maybe we always did, and I didn't know it because, at one time in the Chicago area, we'd have, 2 papers in the morning, 2 papers in the afternoon. And there was a kind of a suburban paper too that would come out. So 5 papers. The suburban paper came out like twice a week. So there was a lot of newspapers in the house, but you had a lot of different perspectives. For instance, the Tribune was conservative, the Sun-Times, not so much. And, now, but I don't remember when I read those that I sat there and go, this isn't true. Now I'll read the Tribune, which isn't conservative anymore, and I'll see opinion written in there, and I'm picking it out, and then I go and look things up, and it's like, well, that's his opinion. It's not a fact. It's, or he's just dead wrong. It's almost like when they were talking about Trump all the time, the favorite word was debunked. Trump said blah, 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 which has already been debunked. Debunked by who? I mean, by you? And you find that even with the AI stuff, if you put it in there, you can argue with them. They'll say something and you go, that's not right, and give them a fact, and it changes everything. You're like, I'm not sure that's factual at all. If I could change it.
There's actually a tool that I use for my media now and various research. It's called FreeSpoke. Have you heard of this?
I have, yes.
So I actually enjoy it because it presents both sides. It tells you how far leaning whichever direction, and then it gives you all the sources, which is quite interesting. What other resources do you use in terms of finding the unbiased media?
Yeah, it's very difficult, honestly. But I do think you have to, there's some trust that you have, right? There's some, you talk to conservatives, they'll probably say Fox News, New York Post are good, Wall Street Journal. But, and the liberals have many more choices. But the problem is, are they credible? And you have to check out, the good thing about like videos, and maybe it's like, you'll see it on X. Now we have the issue with the ICE agent and this woman being shot in the car, and was she trying to run him over? And that? Well, you get to see all the different videos. You can make up your own mind. We no longer have to see if the journalist just writes it in the newspaper and we read, oh, he shot an unarmed woman who was making a turn, or whatever someone might write. That I think the problem is, when we as consumers have to sit there and check everything out, most of us won't, right? I do it because I'm kind of a news junkie, and I'll look into it because it just doesn't sound right, but I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to look at different sources and say, where can I find this? But, and that's one of the reasons with the book that I wanted to reference these issues that I write, because I don't want people picking it up saying, well, that's just total BS. Where did he come up with that? Well, I reference it. Go look yourself if you don't like it. I'm sure some people don't like it. Now there's still that issue of, could you pick and choose what references? Because anybody can write whatever they want. So you have to be careful. You have to make sure it's credible. I mean, there are a lot of, like you mentioned, conspiracies. There's no better way to make money. We're seeing it, with Charlie Kirk, unfortunately, with his assassination. There are some people that are making a lot of money by, instigating questions on who killed him, why was he killed, did his own organization have something to do with it? It gets a little out there, and you're like, wait a minute, why are you doing it as a podcaster or a blogger or whatever? Well, you're getting a lot of followers, you're making a lot of money.
Yeah, no, at the end of the day, that's the negative light that's shed on even my topic. I mean, when we have a lot of these topics that come up, I actually try to stay away from news like that, because it's very hard to establish the appropriate context on an event such as Charlie Kirk. And unless you present the facts as we know them to be, without speculation, obviously adding a little bit of theory is appropriate, because the reality is, it probably wasn't just a kid. Like, there's probably a little bit more something to it. I mean, we go back to something as JFK, like Lee Harvey Oswald is the lone gunman. We go back to Operation Mockingbird and the CIA's control over the press. And we have constantly been fed this narrative that has been debunked per se over the years. And I think that's what has led to a lot of this speculation. But the farther you speculate, you actually get further away from the truth, in my opinion. And that's what's most damning.
Yeah, and then you're just as guilty as perhaps the ones that are feeding you the one true theory or whatever they call the theory. It's I know there was even a discussion, and it might have been RFK Jr. who brought up about his own father being killed, and whether there was some involvement by the CIA, his own people that were guarding him, and you're like, a lot of it, when you hear it, you're like, that makes sense. I get it. So yeah, some of the theories, some of the conspiracy theories are right on, but I think some people are out there, like Charlie Kirk. We saw him; he was assassinated. We saw the bullet. And it's not only him. When Trump was shot in Pennsylvania, you had people on the left saying he faked it. The whole thing was faked. And how come this glass doesn't break? Why is it? Oh my God. I mean, the New York Times had a photo showing the bullet. I don't know what I can do with you. You're looking for something to denigrate the man and say, like, he put this whole thing on. So, which makes you think, wait a minute, he had someone fire a shot that killed an innocent person in the stands. Why not just use a blank? I don't get that. Why, if you're going to fake it, you can hit your ear and have fake blood. That makes no sense. But, any theory or any event can now be turned into a conspiracy, and people are attacking it, and it becomes a problem. And you add that into all the media already having a bias, mostly to the left. I think, in the book I mentioned, the number of journalists who are Republicans compared to Democrats in the last study, which goes back a few years, but I want to say it was only 3% are Republicans. And that's amazing. Of course there's a bias then. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be 50-50 here. You're going to have some independents and whatever, but can we get, double figures? Let's get double figures in there. And because that's every journalist in the country. That's counting Fox News. That's counting little newspapers in Alabama and Arkansas and Wyoming, where the Republicans dominate. So there's definitely a bias already. And then you take these other outlets, and obviously when you're doing a blog or a podcast, you don't have the same standards as that should be at the New York Times. Unfortunately, sometimes the bloggers and podcasters have better ethics.
That's very true. And I think the most unfortunate part of all of this is the further you try to speculate and stuff story into what is actually the objective fact on the scenario, you almost turn the reality of the nature of the event into a conspiracy in its own. And it makes it seem not true. So I'm curious as to what we could do as a society to kind of steer ourselves away from that, because it's very toxic. And Trump has battled that time and time again in various things. I actually, just for pure entertainment purposes, I watched a podcast recently with Kai Trump. She went on Impulsive, hosted by Logan Paul. And she was explaining some very interesting things. She was asked, well, what was your upbringing like? And she said that my family is all very strong-willed people. So as I got kind of put in the limelight with my grandfather being the president, it wasn't necessarily something that I battled, because I was raised like this. I didn't care about people's opinions necessarily. And And I found it concerning that the media portrayed him to be this way. And one of her statements was, my grandfather is just an awesome grandfather. Like, I don't see him as this political figure, as this icon that he is. And I thought that was interesting to give some personal context on all that.
Yeah, and I think if you remember the Republican convention, they did a lot of that family stuff.
Yeah,
and
she actually spoke.
Yeah, and I thought that was a good move. I don't know who decided to do that, but whoever organized that, it kind of humanized them, right? Because most people, I never met my grandparents because they were in Ireland. We didn't have the money to go there, but and you couldn't go virtually. Now you can hook up with people all over the world and talk to them. But, anybody who has grandparents, or they could tell you the real who they are, right? This is, you don't know, you could find the meanest football coach, right? But if it's his grandkid will tell you, no, he's not mean. He's a softie. He brings us for ice cream. And, what he does out there on the football field, well, that's different. And I think it humanizes people when you hear the real story. Like, for most people, what do they really do when they're with their family, with their friends, and so forth? And I think the media wasn't going to do that for Trump. That's for sure. So doing it at the convention was a good idea by the RNC.
Absolutely. So you mentioned your grandparents were in Ireland. Are your parents first generation American?
Yeah. They came here, got to be the 50s. Separately, they didn't know each other, and they met here. Back then, a lot of, depending on what you are, if you're Irish, Italian, whatever, they would do these dances in certain neighborhoods wherever they lived, and that's how they met. At one of those dances, and that's the. They went back a few times. Like when they were married, they did for their honeymoon. We all sent them back like on their 25th, 26th anniversary around there. But, as a family, we never did. There were 5 kids, we were lucky to have, we've got to pay for, clothes and whatever. And so it's a different life. And we didn't, at that time, there were a lot of people that came from Ireland and other countries. But it was legal immigration. They came for a better life, mostly a better life for their children. That's how they looked at it. Like they knew they weren't going to do, fantastic. They were just going to make a living, hopefully, have a house, send their kids to school, and maybe some other kids would do well,
So being the first... Being the first generation American to be born in America, how much greater appreciation has that given you for our free country?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because my mom would always say, people would ask her, do you want to go back? Do you ever want to go and live there? Do you want to? And, this was ingrained to us. It's like this. Why would I? This is the greatest country ever. Why would I want to go back? And to me, that always stuck. It's like, well, she's been there and she's been, it's not like I'm picking out a country to live in, but we're kind of lucky they made that choice and then met here, because where else, can you do anything you want? And, 2 of my brothers also became attorneys. One's a judge. We've done all right. And I think it's all because of them, that they made those sacrifices. And it tells you in this country, anybody can succeed. Now you might not have Elon Musk money. It depends what some people have these unrealistic expectations. If I'm not a billionaire or whatever, or, I don't become president, or, well, there's success, and then there's darn good luck too. You come up with a great idea, or you just have that mind to do that. But I think it always gave me the perspective of, we were lucky. And, my family members that have gone back to Ireland and talk to my cousins or during the, last 10 years, aunts and uncles have passed away, but the ones that were alive, they were always saying, no, your mom made the right choice or your dad made the right choice. You would have been poor here. You would have had it tough. And it's like, that's a sacrifice, I think, to take off from your big they had big families and to move to another country. I mean, none of us even moved out of the state. We've all stayed in Illinois. So we're not the adventure. It was just them. So I think very fortunate to have the opportunity. And it does give you this respect for the country that, how lucky we were. Because, most people probably, it's like if your grandparents, great-grandparents have been here a long time, you're like, oh, where else would I be? I always did look at it like, well, I could have been born there. I could have been living there. And
that's the reality of the situation. You almost lose the perspective of what it means to be an American if you are here for generations. And on top of that, the algorithms don't help.
Yeah, right. And, and the thing is, I'm sure like Ireland's a nice country, but it doesn't give you the opportunity. It's the opportunities here. What the founding fathers built is amazing. Maybe, everybody refers to it as the great American experiment. And yeah, it might have all been an experiment, but these guys, not that they didn't have faults. We all have faults. I think that's one of the things you see when you research. Like everybody has some good and some bad, right? I mean, I've had people say, well, what do you not like about Trump? Oh, there's things he's done I don't like. I mean, there's things that, every politician has done. Ronald Reagan, it's like, I can't put all my hopes and prayers in what a politician's going to do. But, you take the majority and you go, against the other candidate, this is what I see. I like this guy better, And I think when you do that with the country, you think, and I don't understand how people talk about how they want to change it into something else. The socialism has become a big issue, right, over the years. And, New York electing Adami. Are you people nuts? Have you not read anything about, socialist countries? That experiment has failed. I mean, it's never been successful. Why do you think we're going to be the first ones? I mean, a republic had already happened elsewhere, a democracy, a republic, all those have worked. And so I think we've done it better, but it's worked before. It's not like we made up our own system that never had been tried.
No, most certainly. And at the end of the day, the reality is every system is flawed. There's not one thing that's perfect. And I think that's where people kind of form some unnecessary bias. What I found interesting is that within my circle, people that are aging toward retirement, they're actually planning to move out of the country. And I've seen this in greater waves than I feel like has ever been seen before. What about your circle? Are you seeing something similar?
I know there's people that talk about that all the time. I did know someone that I used to work with probably 10 years ago, an attorney and his wife. They, both retired and they were going to Mexico. And I don't remember the part of Mexico, but they were sure this was the place to live. They were back in 6 months. I mean, I think especially, especially when you're older, I don't know. We certainly have problems with healthcare, but have they been to other countries? They have even greater problems. And I think, this idea that you're going to go and live in a foreign country where you don't know the language, or even if you do, what are you doing? Your friends and family aren't there. It doesn't seem like a great idea. I'm not even big on, I hear people tell me, I want to travel the world. Why? I mean, I'll pick out a few countries, but I'm not looking to go to every country. No.
Yeah.
I don't want to be Trump Jr. here, but, and call these types of names. But I do think, okay, enough. I don't have to visit all those countries. And there's so much here. I mean, the U.S. has so many different parts, and everywhere I've gone in this country, there's something amazing that you find. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm in Las Vegas, and here in Nevada is nothing but a dry desert, cold in the north and hot in the south. And there is so much beauty here that a lot of people don't know about. Gold towns, the history here in Nevada, is immense. The mob, it's a never-ending cycle. Area 51, it just gets bigger and bigger.
There you go.
There's so much here and something that seems so deserted.
Yeah, and I don't understand when people talk about they want to move out. And maybe it's just hyperbole. Maybe they're mad at politicians. You heard a lot of anti-Trump people say that. Probably some on the other side said it when Biden was there, but not as many. I always look at it like, hey, if my guy's not elected, I can wait him out 4 years. We'll be okay. Yeah. Act accordingly as far as your finances and investments and whatever you're doing, and you'll be fine. It's a storm. It's not going to change the country, hopefully.
Absolutely.
But we'll see.
So before writing this book, did you generally trust institutions and official narratives, or did that skepticism develop later?
I think years ago, I certainly did trust institutions. As time has gone on, and you realize, I never, in college, which is years ago, I think they probably weren't trying to indoctrinate me just as well as they do with current students. Current students, or the last 10, 15 years probably, the indoctrination's strong. The difference is back then, we would, in class, and I remember one, time there was a professor, I was the only one objecting. Say, no, that's nutty. I'm arguing with him, and he's getting upset, and he said, does anybody agree with Mr. Brennan? Well, of course, all my classmates sat there silently. They didn't want to say anything, because usually what we did is we didn't say much, and then when the test came, you wrote what he wanted. You just gave him what he wanted. So if someone pulled up some of those, exams that I did, I probably sound like a flaming, leftist or something, because they were. At the time, I didn't realize that they were trying to convince us of that stuff. We were just all kind of like, oh yeah, we agree in the class, we walk outside the class and talk about the professor. And that's all we did. Now the students seem to adapt to, oh, that's what I said. They told us that, it's got to be true. There's no critical thinking. And that's a problem. So I think earlier than most, we were figuring that out, a different generation, but we didn't know it was indoctrination, I guess, is my point. We just thought.
It's interesting you bring up the concept of critical thinking. And I think that's something that is, in the education system as a whole, is being drifted away from. It's not being taught how to think critically, how to check sources. It's very briefly touched on. And then that's it. So I don't think that's helped by any way, shape, or form.
No, it's not. And I think we should be teaching more of that, and people using logic. I'm always surprised when people go, oh, I don't know about that. How would I know this? Whatever fact it is. It's like you have something in your hand that's got all this information. Look it up. It's easy to look it up, and there's several sources, and you'll be better off than saying I don't know, or just taking the word of somebody who's preaching it to you. So I'm always amazed by that.
I think a lot of people live in the reality of ignorance is bliss.
Yes.
And it doesn't help the cause, because we're all opinionated beings at the end of the day that lead us to very controversial conversations. We all have our opinions, right? And if you live in that state of ignorance and you don't actually have the knowledge on whatever you're trying to, your opinions are, and you just avoid the conversation, then what good are you doing to society at the end of the day?
Yeah, good point.
So how did this book really begin? Not as a project, but as a question you couldn't stop asking.
Yeah, I think, like I said, after my friend had written the book about Aaron Burr, I thought, this is just striking me as the way Burr and Trump were both treated. And I started looking at other people too to see, was there anybody else that's comparable? I couldn't find anybody else comparable. So, I thought, I've always thought I could write, which there might be a little ego there where you go, I think I could do this.
After reading your book, you absolutely can write. So that's not egotistical by any means.
well, thank you. But people, you think, oh, I could do this. I've often thought I could do a lot of things. As a kid, I thought, well, I could hit a baseball pretty well. And not really, but, writing, it became something I've always wanted to do and thought about doing. And when the opportunity arose, I said, well, maybe you never know exactly what you will write. People go, well, you're going to write this great novel. You're going to, I don't know. I always thought I'll write something. And this just kind of fell into my lap. And by researching it, it kind of hooked me. And now I am hooked to the point where, okay, what's the next one? As I'm out there talking about this one, I'm thinking, I want to do another one.
What ideas do you have in mind thus far?
Yeah, there's, I've talked about, stuff. I'm amazed by the Kennedys' relationship with the Democrat Party and how, often the Democrats haven't treated them that well, and the result when they do that. But I haven't researched enough of it to really put it to paper yet. But there's,
But you do plan on writing some more?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah. I'd like to get something out this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, I'm looking forward to that. And honestly, going back to my thought on the education system and history being taught is very dry. That's what I found most intriguing about your book. And initially I was like, this may be a very strong opinion book. This may be some very dry history. But as I actually got into it, it almost read like a novel. And it although it is a little bit right-leaning, it's not overwhelming. And I read one chapter and then an idea gets brought up and I'm like, oh my gosh, like it sucks me in just like a novel would. It feels like I'm reading a political James Patterson.
Wow. Well, that's very nice.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend whoever's listening to this to check out the book. Regardless of your stance or your opinion on politics, it uncovers a lot of information that is buried. So it's very important. So at what point did you realize this wasn't just curiosity anymore, that this needed to be written and shared publicly?
Yeah, I think, as I did the research and, at first I went in with the theory, like, I think there's a connection here, but I had to research Burr more, see where, if my thoughts were right based on just reading one book. So I read several and pulled several, documents and then started connecting those to things that were going on with Trump and pulling old stories on Trump to say, yeah, I remember this or that, whatever issues they were, and then trying to divide it up into different chapters to make some sense of it so people aren't like, what the heck are you doing there? But yeah, it really took until I got everything together and started putting some of it down. It's like, I think we have something here. I think we could actually make this a real book. And part of it, when you're doing that, I have a regular gig as an attorney, so it's more of a love, like I want to do it, but I don't have to. But at the same time, I wanted to prove, hey, I can write this thing. I can write something, whether people like it or not. I can write something, put a book together, and say, hey, I did this. But as it flowed, I thought this has to be told. And I've told other people, I do believe it's important that the story's being told. And the book references this with journalism. I think it was Philip Graham who had become the publisher of the Washington Post basically by marrying the daughter of the publisher. So he got a job there, was promoted up the chain, and became the publisher. But he did say, that the newspapers are the first recording of history. So they're writing the history. And for Trump, that history is not good, right? They're they're banging it out saying this guy's a problem. He's a dictator. He wants to, be a king. He wants to run for 3 terms. And when you start going through that and breaking it down, you realize you don't want that history to be told by them. You want a balanced history where at least there's places where you could pick up something and go, oh, this guy doesn't say that. He's got a different perspective.
Absolutely. That's why I think your book is honestly a blessing to the historical narrative, because it does bring up a lot of the context that is missing. And as you said, Trump being a king or a dictator, I don't think that's his intention at all. He's already said he's not going to run for another term.
Right.
He's done. So like at the end of the day, why even put this stuff out there? Like in terms of the media,
I don't know why people buy that. I think what Trump wants to do is put his mark on the party. That J.D. Vance will get elected, and that they go on for another 8 years or more, and that whether you call it MAGA or whatever, that the theories that he's espousing, and now he's into a lot of foreign policy issues, that those become the bedrock of the country, the party, and we'll see. I mean, I think he's had a lot of good ideas, but I also see that he's taken a lot of heat for those ideas, no matter what he does.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what you do, good, bad, or indifferent, there's always going to be the side that doesn't agree with you.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that things are so controversial, even something that really doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's brought into something so much bigger.
Absolutely. You're always going to have critics, no matter what you do. But when you're the president, you kind of start out with 50% of the people not liking you anymore. And that's sad. But you would think that we would all rally behind a president and say, okay, I like to think we'd have 70%, but I don't know when's the last time we had that for a sustained time. I don't know. Maybe 9/11, George W. might have had it for that short period, but that quickly dissipated.
And even then, in certain areas, that's like forgotten history. Yeah,
right.
So what personal cost came with writing this book? Relationships, faith, peace of mind? Did anything change?
So far, not really. I think one of my brothers is a bit of a liberal. So when I gave him one of the first copies and, actually autographed it, which, but he saw the headline and he's not a real Trump fan. And he's like, oh my God, what have you done? But it hasn't really changed our relationship. We go back and forth, but these people that let their families break up because of politics, that's crazy. I mean, it's kind of like, fighting when you're kids. I would punch him hard and he would hit me hard too. But, in the end, we didn't really want to kill each other. We just were trying to damage each other. But yeah, same thing now. You try to damage them with words, but in the end, you're still a family member. And, same thing with friends. There's people disagree. There's people that think it's great. I hang out only with the ones that think it's great. No, I just, I look at it like, hey, politics divides people, but you still have to keep the relationship, even if politically we were voting differently before. What's the big deal? We'll still vote differently.
No, absolutely. And kind of like what I was saying, regardless of opinion or your bias on politics as a whole, the book doesn't necessarily push an agenda. It really just talks about history. And if we aren't willing to read history, then where are we going? This is part of the reason history repeats itself, is because a lot of the context is missing. So if you aren't willing to read the context, then we're just going to repeat the same cycle time and time again.
Correct.
Last question for you, Dennis.
Okay.
If someone reads your book and takes away only one thing, what truth do you hope that they walk away with?
I think it kind of gets back to what we said before, that there's good and bad in everyone. And I think, Aaron Burr He had a lot of good qualities. He did a lot of good things for the country. He fought in the Revolutionary War. He was a statesman. Now, whether he's guilty of like the Burr conspiracy or not, I kind of leave that open in the book. I don't think there's evidence that he's guilty, which kind of brings in the legal part. My friend who wrote about it was convinced he's not guilty, but he's also not a lawyer. Like I said, he's a Democrat political consultant, so he's got a soft spot somewhere up on the dome. So he might not think the same way. Same thing with Trump. There's things, like I mentioned earlier, I support most of what he's doing. Every once in a while, he'll say things, and you're like, I don't know if that's such a good idea. He just brought up about, limiting credit cards to 10%. Well, some people have survived because of credit cards and pulled themselves out of trouble, and they don't have to sign up for the credit card. There is some free choice here, and that's what's made this country great. Financial institutions have been a part of that. It sounds very socialistic when you bring up ideas like that. Bernie Sanders has that idea, and if he's for it, it's probably not a good idea. So, and there's other things too, but I think that's the premise, that you're going to find good and bad in these guys. And if you read the book, it's to the point that you said. There's stuff to learn, and you don't have to agree with it. But if you're pro-Trump, you'll get a lot of facts, I think, and you can say, oh, I've got these facts, and I now know things when I get into my argument with my brother or whoever. And if you're not pro-Trump, but you just want to see where everybody else is coming from, you can see it's all referenced, and you can, see what the facts are and try to disprove those. So there's something for everyone.
If you could put all your ideas into one insightful sentence, what would you leave with my audience today?
Wow, that's tough. I would say that, every politician, whether you like them or not, that runs for office at that level, whether it's vice president or president, as these two men did, they are trying to do what they think is best for the country. You may not agree with it, and they might not actually have success, but they're trying to do their best. They're not trying to go in there and rip you off or become kings. And I think we have to be more open-minded for even the people we don't vote for, that they're actually trying to do a good job for the country. And we should try to support that. And I would hope the politicians would make policies that aren't so far out there that you can't on one side or the other support it.
Amen to that, Dennis. I think that you're absolutely correct. Not everyone is corrupt at the end of the day. And I think us pushing our opinion and our bias on other people and inherently thinking that corruption is within every facet and walk of life is incorrect, to say the least. But Dennis, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very impactful interview, and I thank you for writing your book. Where can my audience find you on social media and in general?
Yeah, I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Dennis Brennan 61. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on Truth Social, Dab 535. I think I have a website. I know I have a website. I don't just think it. It's authordennisbrennan.com. And then the book is for sale there. It's on sale through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and where all good books are sold, I'm told to say. So you can buy it just about anywhere.
Awesome. Well, Dennis, thanks again for your time. Blessings to you and your family, and I'm looking forward to your next book.
Thank you so much.
Wow. What a truly impactful interview. So much insight shared by Dennis Brennan, and what an amazing book. I want to take some time to read some direct quotes from the book, some various sections that I thought were very interesting. If you have the opportunity to purchase this book, definitely check out the first link in the description. I highly recommend it. This book is honestly unlike anything I've ever read prior. Although it is very historical based, it's not dry. It almost reads like a novel, as I mentioned in the interview. It's a little bit right leaning, but it's not over biased in any way, shape, or form. So I'll go through and read some of these direct quotes and paragraphs. So Aaron Burr was a major political figure in the early days of the United States of America. However, the chances are that most Americans have very limited knowledge of Aaron Burr's life as a military man, a U.S. senator, or a vice president. While school day memories can be vivid in some cases, it fades on the life of Aaron Burr after students learn of the famous duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, in which Aaron Burr shot Hamilton. History classes have consistently taught that Hamilton died from a gunshot wound. We also know that he would later be idolized in a Broadway musical. However, the sad truth for the lovers of the play is that Hamilton may have been part of the first swamp or deep state in the United States. That's a fact that's conveniently left out of history books. In fact, still today, some historians, politicians, government workers, and journalists contend that there isn't a swamp or deep state, providing explanations that range from outright denial to attacking those who raise the issue by obfuscating the discussion by pointing out the obvious that most federal government workers are not working against certain presidents. That's wild. Trump has consistently pointed to the reality of the deep state or the higher powers that be, whether you want to call them the cabal, the Illuminati, whatever. The reality is, this stuff has parallels to our founding fathers. How outrageous is that? There's been an agenda, a deeper level of control, honestly, since most likely before that. But at least here in the United States, we have the historical foundation that shows this. And what a wild, truly insane concept. So in this section of the book, he goes on to state how there was trials and tribulations that Aaron Burr faced in terms of the media. So I'll read you this section relating to Trump and giving some insight. So Donald Trump has faced similar individuals such as Michael Cohen, his one-time attorney who claimed Trump knew nothing about the payment to Stormy Daniels, and then testified in a criminal trial against Trump where his story changed and implicated Trump. Baker noted that the press arguably played a significant role at a time when citizens relied heavily on partisan media sources. While Baker doesn't say it, the same could be said for today's divide, with Democrats relying on left-leaning media sources and Republicans only trusting outlets such as Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Post, to name a few of a limited number of conservative outlets. It may be disheartening to realize that journalism hasn't progressed since 1807, with partisan bias playing a role in news reporting. So, if this parallel is drawn so clearly since the founding of the United States of America, and then we have the uncovering of projects such as Operation Mockingbird and the CIA's control of the media, if that doesn't show you that there is some sort of agenda being pushed here, a controlled narrative, I'm not sure what else to tell you. Take some time to really think through things, to question the narrative, to check multiple sources when you have some topic that's presented to you. Because ignorance is not bliss. History will continue to repeat itself if we don't make ourselves aware of the reality of the situation. So here's an abstract that was published by someone that he references in his book that gives some more insight on media corruption. Many communities, even in the newly settled West, hosted 2 or more competing papers. And because the Post Office Act of 1792 effectively subsidized newspaper transitions and codified the printer's customary exchange privileges, political news circulated in a remarkably unfettered fashion. In this fluid environment, writers for the press, especially those like John Wood, with a knack for collecting information and arresting attention, could, with sufficient nerve, imagine themselves powerful enough to drag down a man as resourceful and well-connected as Aaron Burr. At the same time, developments of the political press afforded greater play to what we call disinformation. Some of Burr's political enemies claimed that Burr was no innocent bystander in the world of this type of journalism. Some credited or blamed him for having orchestrated subterfuges against his running mate Thomas Jefferson in the 1800 election. It appears no evidence of any alleged political backstabbing was ever produced about Burr's action trying to undermine Jefferson, but it has been documented that Jefferson's allies did make sure that Burr received fewer votes than Jefferson in 1796, manipulating Virginia's electoral votes. So, when Donald Trump referenced voter fraud and election interference, and the United States was put off by that, and he was called a liar, but yet we have direct parallels and evidence that says that this kind of thing has been going on since the time of our founding fathers. I think it's honestly time to wake up, question the narrative, and draw your own conclusions based on your research. We can't just rely on the agenda-based narrative of mass media. We can't rely on the algorithms that push the narrative that it knows you want to hear. We need to take a step back, remove ourselves from the situation, and realize there's something greater at play. So here's a really interesting thing that completely relates to our modern society today. We know that Trump recently invaded, for lack of a better word, Venezuela. We captured the president and his wife, and now we're taking control of their economy and oil. So, according to Baker's abstract, the Western world charged that behind Burr's plan to invade Mexico and form his own country was a network of conspirators, including an ill-fated expedition to liberate Venezuela from the Spanish, a conspiracy involved taking Louisiana and Florida, and to the Spanish conspiracy of Burr's purported co-conspirator, James Wilkinson. So, in the book, he references that they tried to charge Burr with treason. They tried to say that he was trying to take the southern states of the United States and succeed them from the United States of America and kind of form his own thing. None of this was true, but yet we see this today with Trump. We see that the media is portraying him to be this dictator, this fascist ruler, or something that in reality is not what's actually going on. So think about that. This stuff has continually happened through history, not just here in America. So another direct parallel into our modern society, we know Bill Clinton had alleged affair scandals. Well, also in 1792, Beckley's propaganda news brought to light then Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton's relationship with James Reynolds and his wife Maria. It was known as the Hamilton-Reynolds affair, the first major sex scandal in the young country's political history. Hamilton had an affair with Maria Reynolds, whose husband blackmailed Hamilton over the affair. Hamilton, in a very Trump-like fashion, paid $1,300 in hush money to keep the affair secret. That $1,300 was about 1/3 of Hamilton's annual income. Over 200 years later, Donald J. Trump would find himself in a New York State courtroom as a defendant, accused of paying hush money to Stormy Daniels in an alleged violation of campaign finance laws. Corruption, corruption, corruption. It doesn't stop. So here's a direct quote that he references from Ronald Reagan. Reagan attacked the bureaucracy swamp with the famous line, quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Reagan, like Trump, had sought the highest office as an outsider, but he was also a former governor of California. His intention may have certainly been to end the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., and he did try to eliminate many government rules and regulations, but more important problems made it difficult for him to complete the goal that was even clear in his inaugural address. He stated that day, quote, "Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem." What a powerful statement, with so much unsettling truth behind it. So, once again, I appreciate Dennis Brennan's time today. Very grateful that he wrote this book. And check the first link in the description to go purchase his book and read it for yourself, because it is very insightful. It's very shocking. And most importantly, unsettling to know that these parallels were drawn from our founding fathers and continue to carry themselves through our modern democracy or republic. It honestly leaves me speechless. And to that, thank you for listening to The Broken Truth. Make sure to follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen on, leave us a 5-star review, share it with someone who needs to hear the truth or is interested in the truth. Leave your thoughts below, and until next time, stay awake, stay aware, and stay questioning the narrative.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known, but you were meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.